Tribune Ius Roland, commander of 1,000 bows of the home guard, watched the demoralized army of dwarves, elves, humans, and centaurs march towards the remaining bridges over the rushing river. The safety of the city walls was less than a league away. The army had left with banners flying, troops in shining armor, weapons held aloft, drums and bugles announcing their presence to the thousands of civilians watching. The one that returned looked completely different. Banners furled or missing altogether. The cries of the wounded came from dozens of wagons and carts. More wounded limped or were helped by their comrades. And it was far, far smaller than before. An elven naval officer approached with a huge Northman beside him. Roland didn't know humans got that big, taller than most orcs, and with a massive frame. He was wearing a bearskin cloak over chainmail, a long blonde beard, and hair braided in the back. He carried a wicked-looking single-bladed axe, its handle as long as he was tall. It had a half-moon-shaped blade and a hooked spike on the other side. A shield was slung over his back, cleverly secured to allow the shield to be swung into position in moments. A long sword and dirk were secured to his belt, but it was the eyes that fascinated Roland the most, wintry blue that bored into you without flinching. Tedmus Ianlin, captain of Ian Phoenix, he said with the casual ease of someone who didn't take military protocol seriously. He waved a hand to the Northman. "This is Leif Gufisson, warband leader from the Northland kingdom of Haljoro." The big man dipped his head in greeting. Tedmus then turned to speak with the Northman, speaking in familiar language. He heard his name, so he assumed it was an introduction. Tedmus looked at Tribune. "He doesn't speak our language," he answered Roland's quizzical look. "How many men did he bring?" Roland asked with a flicker of hope. Tedmus replied, "About 50. 50? That's all?" Roland felt that brief bit of hope disappear. "Well, any help is appreciated, so thank him for me." Tedmus began to translate Roland's gratitude when the Northman let out a chuckle. Seeing the look of disappointment on the elf's face, he assumed it was because of how few men he brought. The warband leader laughed and grinned at the elven Tribune before addressing Tedmus in his impressively deep voice. He said they were just the closest and sent to prepare for when the rest of the Northmen arrive. Tedmus translated. The Northman continued speaking, and whatever it was, it brought a look of relief to Tedmus' face. Tedmus turned to Roland and said, "Tell the little elfman," his words, not mine, "that the war banners have gone out to all the clans and tens of thousands will answer the call to battle and the chance to die a glorious death with blade in hand and the All-Father's blessing." Before Roland could ask, Tedmus continued, "The All-Father is their most important god, and warriors who fall in battle are said to go to his halls and to fight and drink and celebrate every day." It was far different than the elvish version of heaven, but it did sound like a fitting afterlife for a warrior, and it was a very good incentive for them to join the war. Tedmus continued, he wished to study the situation up close. He wants to gather as much information as possible for their battle chief. Roland nodded and asked. The Northman spoke, his sonorous voice sounding like rocks grinding together. Tedmus nodded, then turned towards Roland. He asked how such a big army was so badly beaten. Roland started to bristle at his words, but then he couldn't deny that. One look at the column, and it was obvious they didn't just lose the battle, but were routed. He heard from an elven captain that there were just too many to hold back. They were almost surrounded and cut off. That it was the charge of a battalion of centaur lancers and archers that briefly threw the enemy back in confusion. It bought the army enough time to break out of the closing trap. But the centaurs paid a heavy price for it, with less than half returning to form a rear guard. They bought the army time to pull its shattered units into the semblance of a retreating army and not bands of fugitives running in every direction. He waited while Tedmus translated that for Leif. The Northman replied in that rumbling voice, to which Tedmus answered. He said they are very brave warriors, and may the All-Father welcome them to his halls. While they were speaking, one of the elven general's aides approached and waited to be recognized. The young elf saluted. Roland didn't recognize him, but he was very young. This was probably his time in the field, Roland thought, but he's gonna get an education in a hurry. General Naeros's compliment, sir, he started. He's ordered the dwarven engineers to destroy the last of the bridges as soon as the last wagon is across it. He pointed upstream at a much smaller bridge. That bridge is to remain standing until the last of the rear guard crosses it, and then be destroyed. He wants you to hold the bridge with your archers while that happens. The aide finished. Roland looked at the young elf and asked, "Did he say where these archers are? I left my men on the walls, and I can't do it by myself." The aide's face turned red before he said, "I'm sorry, sir. I forgot to say there was a squad coming from the other bridge, since it is coming down," he replied. Roland hid a grin and let the youngster off easy. "Tell the general that orders are understood and will be carried out." The aide rode off in a hurry to avoid further embarrassment. The sound of the dwarven engineers setting off their charges made everyone instinctively duck and look as the last of the wide bridges fell into the river. The archers arrived soon after. It was a matter of minutes before the dwarves placed the demolition charges under the last bridge. And just in time, too, as clouds of dust announced the rear guard approaching fast. As they got closer, Roland and his men yelled to get the centaurs' attention. They turned towards the bridge and thundered across it. It was barely wide enough to allow two elves to pass at once, so it forced the centaurs to pass single file. The last of the centaurs' rear guard came into view, staying just ahead of the enemy vanguard by stopping several meters ahead of them and firing a volley. They'd then move back as the enemy got close, move back several meters, and stop to fire another volley. Any time some of the enemy got frustrated and charged, they'd stand their ground and pour arrows into them. As the last of the first group of centaurs cleared the bridge, he unslung a horn and sounded two long and one short blasts. The rest of the rear guard fired two quick volleys and turned to dash back to cross the river. As soon as the last centaur crossed the bridge, a dwarf pushed the plunger to set off the charges, but nothing happened. Cursing in Dwarven, they began inspecting the detonator on their side, and then checking the cord attached to the explosives. A loud baying sound of wargs reached their ears, causing everyone to look up quickly. A double handful of orc warg riders appeared from the forest and sprinted past the enemy infantry. It would be only moments before they reached the bridge. Roland and his archers ran to the end of the bridge and began firing at the warg riders as fast as they could. Unseen by Roland, Leif Gufisson stripped off his bearskin, shield, and sword belt. He said something to Tedmus and trotted towards the bridge, unslinging his axe as he went. While Roland and his archers stopped the warg riders, the enemy infantry had the time to close in. Goblins with their spears, orcs in armor with swords and axes already dripping with gore, ogres with spiked clubs over their shoulders, and more. Checking his quiver, he found it nearly empty, and a glance said it was the same for his men. Roland looked towards the enemy in despair. drew his sword, and turned to yell for everyone to run. But the order never crossed his lips, as he saw the big Northman trotting up to him and Tedmus trying to keep pace. He touched Roland on the shoulder and shook his head, and then touched his axe to his forehead in salute, and strode onto the bridge. The cacophony of noises from the onrushing horde was deafening and forced Tedmus to yell in his ear. He said, to keep their archers off him. Tedmus then continued, "He'll hold the bridge until the dwarves can finish the job or buy time for us to get to the city." Roland was shocked, but ordered his men to concentrate fire on any archers. He then watched in disbelief as the human broke into a run and charged the goblins already on the bridge. They came forward with spears aimed for his belly, but he simply brushed them aside and brought the axe down on one, spun the axe sideways, and lopped off the heads of two others. He then jumped through the hole he created and began dispatching goblins in quick succession. Being goblins, they used their favorite tactic of running away and ran smack into onrushing orcs that simply ran them over. Roland expected the Northman to retreat, but he stood his ground. He heard the Northman begin to sing as his axe rose and fell, killing any that got within reach. Roland turned to Tedmus and asked, "What is he singing?" "His death song," Tedmus said simply. "He's asking the All-Father to strengthen his hand and grant him a good death. He calls upon him to watch his deeds and take him to the All-Father's hall." Tedmus finished. All of the elves, dwarves, and remaining centaurs stared in awe, as it didn't matter if they were goblins, orcs, or ogress. Anything that came in reach of that wicked axe fell or ran away missing body parts. The river was stained with streaks of red, green, and purple blood. Body parts and gore made the bridge slippery, but still the Northman stood his ground. Unable to fix the bridge explosives, the dwarves headed upstream past the joining of two rivers and to a dam on the river on their side. As the dwarf captain finished explaining their plan, Roland turned to Tedmus. "Tell him to get off the bridge." But Tedmus shook his head. He won't retreat. He sang the death song, and this only ends in victory or death. "Do it," Roland yelled to the dwarf. Another dwarf raised a horn to his lips and blew 3 long blasts. It was only moments before a terrific roar reached them and a cloud of dust and smoke rose into the air. It took only a few minutes for the wall of water, trees, and rocks to come rushing down the river. The force of the onrushing water hit the bridge like a hammer blow, tearing the bridge from the riverbanks. Anyone on the bridge was thrown into the water to drown in the racing currents. As the last defenders began marching back to the city, Roland kept thinking back to just before the bridge collapsed. Did he really see the human dive into the water just before the water hit the bridge? Or did he imagine it?